Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this third exploratory conversation, as we've called it in the context of our Rebalance project. Today we are happy, and I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity of moderating this talk this afternoon. And we have two distinguished panelists. Actually, all panelists are always distinguished, so otherwise we wouldn't have them. But this is not a rhetorical consideration. We have with us today Robert Braun, who a philosopher. He holds a PhD in philosophy. He's currently a senior researcher and a deputy head at the research group on science, technology, and social transformation at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Vienna, Austria. He has a number of additional academic qualifications, but I'd like to just mention that his research focus is on the ontological politics of technological transition, responsible research and innovation, and corporate social responsibilities. A bunch of very hot topics, I would say. I must say that his latest book has a title which could serve as an alternative title for a project, in fact. The title is Post-Automobility Future. So we've got all the good buzzwords in there. Rebalance is a foresight project. It looks at mobility, and it certainly considers that there is a strong need for transition, which means most likely doing away with as much as we can with traditional means of transport. Welcome, Robert. Our second panelist today is Andreu Ulied, who is a partner and director of CRIT, a consultancy based in Barcelona. He has a very eclectic and multidisciplinary background in terms of training, because he started as an engineer, which he then combined with a master in urbanism, and lately with a master in philosophy. So that's an interesting combination, and I'm sure that this will translate into a lively debate this afternoon. So welcome, Andreu, as well. Just a few words of introduction / reminder on the context of these conversations. For those of you who are familiar with the Rebalance project, this is probably a bit repetitive, but I will be very short. The Rebalance project is a research project funded by the European Commission, and in the framework of Horizon 2020, the framework program of research of the European Commission. And it is a foresight project. The ambition is to carry out foresight within a process which is fairly standard, so building scenarios and then backcasting these scenarios to possible policy recommendations, but with a particular perspective, because this is certainly not the first foresight project in the transport sector. There's plenty of those out there. Our ambition and our challenge actually is to dig deeper into the upstream values and cultural determinants that actually have shaped, are shaping, and will shape behavior. Most foresight projects tend to concentrate on the immediate determinants of behavior, socioeconomic, of course, but even to some extent technological. But we are trying to, like I said, dig and delve a little bit deeper upstream in the process of formation of mobility choices. And in that sense, the dialogues that we are organizing every Thursday this month and the next will have, we hope they will be able to feed into the identification of key cultural and value-based factors that should be considered as the deep origin and determinants of how mobility looks like and will look like in the future. So these are exploratory dialogues, and like I said, we hope they will provide input into the next step of the project, which is scenario building. As you all know, we have an audience, participants, which I welcome. We're not be in a position to take the floor directly, but there is a function in the Zoom software which allows them to put questions and possibly also to answer questions in a sort of a chat. It's not the typical chat, the traditional chat function, but it is a way of allowing the participants to put questions, which the panelists will be able to see, and I myself will do my best to pick one or more of these questions and use it to put additional queries to our panelists. Having said all this, let's jump into the topic of today's discussion, which has the stimulating title of Greener Transport Choices. The basic idea here is that we are all observing a number of signals that optimistically tend to show that there is a shift in the attitude of all those involved and engaged in the mobility and transport sector, and a shift which should and hopefully will allow the transport sector to become greener than it is currently and has been in the past. So these signals, I think, come from a little bit everybody. So they come certainly from industry, which is making cleaner vehicles increasingly available, basically, and not only available, but also increasingly performant and hopefully cheaper. Whether these are electric vehicles or vehicles using cleaner fuels or different types of vehicles. The government, on the other hand, is also sending signals, governments, let's say, to generalize, also sending signal and play important role, and can play probably an even more important role when it adopts standards, defines new taxation rules, phasing out of dirty products, but also at the local level, public authorities have the power of initiating or enhancing a redesign of urban space to make them greener, and space, and this also applies obviously to infrastructure. Now, the basic question we have today is, are these initiatives from the public sector and from industry enough to ensure that the transition toward the green mobility can happen, or do we absolutely need a major shift in the attitude of citizens and of mobility users? And actually, putting it the other way around, a bit of malicious interpretation of what is happening. Would both the industry and government take a stand and send the signals they are sending if there wasn't already a movement at the level of users and citizens to somehow promote this and to express needs and requirements to the suppliers of public and private services, that whereby people feel that there is such a need for greener transport, and this is what pushes government and industry towards the green signals that I was mentioning. So that's a bit of a framework of what we'd like to discuss today. And let me start with a question on a very bold questions, if you allow me, maybe a too simplistic one, but the question is, are environmental and health concerns really playing a role in fostering modal shifts? Is it, I mean, are people really aware and driven by available knowledge, available evidence on the damages or the social and environmental benefits of green choices? Or is it more that there is a wave of new conformism, I would say, where adopting and embracing greener choices is perceived a little bit like, you know, almost an obligation and a need to fulfill social norms that drives them? So that would be my opening question. And maybe Robert, you would like to start.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for having me. As bluntly as you asked, let me answer as bluntly, no. But to qualify this no, I think, and sorry to be theoretical and conceptual, I think we need to first reflect on both terms, environmental and health. And I'm skeptical. And I think when critically reflecting on what actually is happening towards claimed environmental shifts, I think the answer is an even bigger qualified no. Because when you ask what is green, when you ask why electrification is good, you realize that these are mostly industry push imaginaries that claim and aim to sustain the current form of, you call it transport, I'll call it mobility, and I'll qualify that too in a minute. Therefore, I think what we see now is nothing new. It's a industry push towards sustaining the complex modern life world in which we're living for the last, say, 100, 120 years. Electrification is pushing externalities to other parts of the world, typically again from the global north to the global south. Electrification is, and this is, simple example, if you look at the street, who are now, what kind of cars are standing at these electric chargers? They're mostly Teslas and expensive Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs. So it's again siphoning public monies from the less affluent to the more affluent. So I am pretty skeptical whether such change that is currently, as you allude to, is trendy, is what it is or what it looks like. And also to critically reflect on the use of words. I use mobilities as opposed to transport because transport dictionary definition is getting or taking goods and people from A to B. That's a very, sorry to say so, old-fashioned way of looking at what's going on. What's going on is a much more social form of being, which sociologists or theorists call mobilities, which is creating and sustaining a specific life world that is both dangerous and climate unfriendly. And to be more blunt, because I do like to be blunt, I think that this current form of life is both a totalitarian moral ecology and a totalitarian, even fascist political structure. And I do use my words carefully because people are coerced into this dangerous, exclusive form of life, mostly dominated by the car. And what we see now is, in terms of electrification, sustaining this life world, and also even further normalizing, killing, injuring, and intoxicating people by the forms of mobilities that are mostly exercised across the world.
Thank you. Well, that's a series of strong statements, not exactly optimistic ones. Andreu, what do you make of this?
Okay, I will say that what I see across cities, across neighborhoods, across genders, people living in rural urban areas. I think all of us, we can see a growing environmental consciousness. And another thing is the interest of everybody. So there is a gap between the environmental consciousness and the actual activities and attitudes we have, I think. And this is, I will say, unavoidable, this difference. So the problem is how we organize this transformation. The transition process is maybe more complicated than the end goal of having healthier, cleaner environments to live, that everybody should agree. I agree with Robert's point of view in the sense that I think that the transitions to electricity is unavoidable and will happen just because the efficiency of electric engines is overwhelming better. So they have all kind of reasons, productivity, also electric engines can be intelligent, electric vehicles, electric engines in general are don't produce the noise of gasoline engines. So the evolution towards electricity is obvious that will happen. And when we have better batteries, so it's going to happen. So these transitions to our greener transport choices, I think, is going to happen. And the driving force probably is technology in this respect. What maybe is without is the social consciousness. So maybe with all of these, we are not being sensitive to social diversity, to social cohesion. So you go to Singapore, and I finish with this, and you see that Singapore is kind of the luxurious ecologic paradigm. So,
Robert, I saw you reacting with, I don't know how to qualify that, but as maybe surprise or
Yes.
to the electromobility inevitability.
Exactly. So I don't, in general, I don't think technology is inevitable in any form or fashion. I think one of the fallacies of our current life world is that we use words as progress to describe a technology push and the constant solutionism. There are problems, so let's bring a technological solution, which we know creates more problems. But and that's what industry is pushing for. And I also think that, and sorry to contradict Andreu, I don't think there is an environmental consciousness. I think there is an environmental imaginary. And this environmental imaginary is pushed forward by numerous actors to actually build up a facade that helps unsee or suppress the real social challenge that we're facing. And that real social challenge is inequality. Inequality, financial, legal, in entitlement across the globe, social, global south, global north, etc. And I think that what we term as environmental consciousness is a shift to substitute the real problem with something that might be solved in inverted commas by bringing new technologies in. And so I think we have to be critical and careful to interpret these processes that we're seeing, especially in mobilities, that again bring a new technology to the fore. And this is obviously only ground mobilities, because we already see the next revolution, as they call it, which is aerial mobility. And I think we're building an even more dangerous and more totalitarian form of life through these technologies, and we should be more careful.
Thank you, Robert. If we somehow maintain some kind of hope that the transition is possible. I'm using these words because you don't seem to be very optimistic about this happening. But to be concrete, are things like the Fridays Future initiative likely to really have some kind of, I mean, to make a difference in the medium long term? Because are they rocking the boat in a sufficiently forceful way for people to react to this totalitarianism that you're evoking, Robert? And I mean, if this is the case, can we say that there is a significant role of the young generation, and therefore that this would reflect significant intergenerational differences in terms of basic values, in terms of basic aspirations? Andreu, maybe you let me ask this question first to you, and then we come back to Robert.
Okay, well, I'm thinking that the attitudes and the interests and the values of people are not independent from the evolution of technology. I'm sorry to say this because I don't like that. I would like to be convinced by Robert otherwise. But since I read Jacques Ellul, probably you know Jacques Ellul, and before Martin Heidegger, I have the understanding that the same that 50, 60 years ago, one American politician said that the interest of General Motors is the same that the interest of the government of the United States. Now we can say the interest of Google, Apple, or Amazon is the same that the interest of the USA. So or the interest of Siemens is not so different from the interest of the European Commission. And when we are saying this, we see the evolution to more efficient and green and cleaner and safer technologies on transport. And this is in line with this environmental consciousness, I say, in the sense that if I now say that I doubt of the climate emergency, and I think I don't understand much global warming and so on, I will be in trouble. I will be in trouble. You know, I cannot say this because the ecology is a dominant ideology, like Antonio Gramsci used to say, it's a dominant ideology, and therefore we cannot say much against this. And this is going to happen. So for me, my concern, my worry is the social consciousness. So I have seen, and you know, everybody knows, cities which are efficient, clean, and environmentally perfect, and then places that you don't want to live because they are not cities. You live alone. You move alone. You are alone. There are not the streets with people all around. There are not the cities that we like in Europe. There are neighborhoods with beautiful houses, you know, self-sustainable, everything clean, everything electric. But people live alone, just connected one with the other. And there are wealthy suburbs all over the world which are this way. And this is what worries me, that this is happening, and this will happen, probably.
Robert.
Well, as Andrew evoked Martin Heidegger in his last interview in the Spiegel magazine, published only after his death, he said that only a God can save us. And one of the things that he referred to was actually the technology push. But this is not a modern phenomenon. The technology was not born with the Industrial Revolution. It is a different type of technology, that's true. But technology is part and parcel of humankind. And I am definitely not, I'm a philosopher of technology. I'm not against technology. Don't misunderstand me. Technology is a complex phenomena in which humans and non-humans, both living beings and non-living beings, share the world and are entangled. I think this is our form of life. I would be stupid to question this. However, the question is, to use a automobility metaphor, who is in the driving seat. And I don't necessarily think that only humans can and should. And also, I don't think that when we are in the driving seat, it is efficiency and a desire to faster and bigger and better that should guide our relationship to our technologies, non-humans. I think that there are certain values that Andrea alluded to that are better guides to how A, we design, B, how we live with our technologies. And to answer the specific question, I think that on the one hand, yes, I think Fridays for Future, and I don't care about the generation because I can allow myself, I have a gray beard, and I can allow myself to say I'm an old man, and I've seen many times that the new generation will solve our problems. They won't. So I don't think Fridays for Future are a new generation. They have certain values, and I appreciate and endorse those values. However, the current system of mobilities has, and this is not only obviously mobilities, but has an immense ability for resilience and incorporating critique. And we've seen this from my CV in corporate social responsibility. We've seen this in responsible research and innovation. And what I would warn the people who are doing Fridays for Future is to think that when industry collaborates, they do share the values. They don't. And the only interest is to pacify and incorporate those ideals and operationalize them in a way that is acceptable and favorable for, and Andrew mentioned these companies, for the Siemenses and the General Motors, etc. So if I can give any advice to Fridays for Future, is they should be more politically aware that these are big beasts, these are big animals, and big animals are dangerous. And these animals that are not only big and dangerous, they're smart. So while they're arguing and claiming that now we will have smart cities and smart vehicles, etc., I think people should be smart. And I do hope, if something, that Fridays for Future's people will be smarter than these companies offering them smart technologies.
Thank you, Robert. So I think this was a very interesting first exchange, which somehow touched upon whether this challenge of a transition towards a more sustainable mobility is a realistic goal, and that it can realistically be pursued with a basket of policies and initiatives which are not completely clear. Incidentally, one of my parallel questions would be, let's assume that indeed this transition happens, and in using the jargon of transition theory, that would mean a change of regime, right? So reflecting a structural change and not just fashionable ways of making choices tomorrow morning and then changing again in a couple of weeks. So if that would be the case, then this would mean that most of the demand-based policies, which are trying to nudge or force or push people towards changing behavior, once this change of regime has happened, if it does happen, then all these policies would be no longer necessary, no longer required. I must say that hearing you, Robert, commenting about the role of the big beasts, it's almost already an answer to this question. No, we will still need this kind of policies, because there will be forces that will keep going in a direction which is not fully aligned with the characterization of the advocated new regime. But I don't know if you would like to, both of you or each of you, to make a brief comment on this.
I very much, sorry. I very much agree with the regime change idea, but I want to take that word use seriously. When thinking of Michel Foucault's description of what a regime is, it's an apparatus that is disciplining and creating certain forms of knowledges that then influence, in colloquial language, unconsciously, our forms of life. And what follows from this is that once we imagine a regime change, it's not the nitty-gritty details that need to be changed. Mm-hmm. And sorry to say, environment, active mobility, etc., are the nitty-gritty details. But the regime that is today in modernity a command and control type of regime. So we need to have a new regime that is less based on command and control, but more on collaboration, on level playing field, on a moral economy that takes certain moral values seriously and accepts that we share this planet with humans and non-humans, and those non-humans are living beings mostly and non-living beings, and we have to rethink our forms of life to adjust to this real, if you will, regime change, and give up our command and control.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It would open up a very wider debate, because I was thinking when you were talking about non-humans, sorry, Andreu, to preempt you, I was thinking about these biodiversity corridors, which are now being very much debated and to a limited extent experimented. And it actually has to do with human mobility, because it would mean using space and using significant chunks of our planet for the specific goal of ensuring non-humans, or at least some of these species, to survive and survive with a significant increase in their welfare. But I don't want to open this debate now, because it's a little bit beyond our scope. Andrea, would you like to also comment on this last issue before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I like the question on the transition. And I realized, listening to your question and the comments by Robert, that how pragmatist I am. Let's say I'm thinking the one book by Cass Sunstein called How Change Happens. So how we move from norms, which are positive norms in the regulations, to social norms, so that you don't need policies or regulations, because society used to do this thing because it's good for everybody. Now, from a pragmatist point of view, we will begin by thinking that the values we have are relatively close. So we share a lot of values in terms of ecology, let's say, healthier cities, safer cities, less pollution, less. So we have global warming. We have close enough values on, let's say, Western advanced societies, but we have different interests. So how we move from our more or less shared values to the transition towards a new situation, a new regime, when our interests are not just perfectly aligned. And now here the idea of Cass Sunstein and many others is behavioral policies. So depending on the way we ask the questions, we can manage this transition period with the people. So not against the people, but with the people. For instance, we knew that people in this situation, in this world we live, which we have too much information all around, we are afraid, hypermodernity, too many questions. So people tend to vote against change. So what politicians in Stockholm, for instance, did to implement road pricing policies? So first they implemented the policies, the road pricing policies. And 1 year afterwards, they asked people, do you want to keep these policies or do you want to remove the road pricing policies? Just people voted, we want to keep the status quo. So the status quo is always has the advantage of being a situation people know. And in the case of traffic calm policies that restrict, let's say, freedom of movement and so on, so create a situation against the short-term interests of some people. It's always good to do a pilot case, to do tactical urbanism, to do a test, because people can experience the new situation. People can see the benefits of the new situation. And then also you have the advantage of that the new situation becomes the status quo. So for me, the discussion is how we organize this transition, as Andrea said, from the norms, imposed norms, to social norms. And this is the art of nowadays, I think, because the transition will happen, but maybe not in the right way, maybe not with the evolution we would like.
Robert, the counter reaction to that, you wanted to take the floor.
Yes. On the one hand, just to reflect on the non-humans, I think we have a total misperception of how the subject and the object relate to each other. We are all cyborgs. And we are cyborgs not only when some technology is built into our body. Two of us are looking at the world through a technology called spectacles, which are part of the body. So we are already cyborgs, you and me, Andrea. We're talking to each other through a mic. But in transportation, when we get in a car, we become car driver hybrids. And also we become car driver road hybrids. So we live in a world in which we are extremely deeply entangled with non-humans that are non-beings. And this has to be taken into consideration when we reflect upon our life worlds. I am not so sure as Andrew, that transition will happen. Of course, we need to define what transition is, but what we're talking about here, or what I'm trying to talk about here, is a paradigm change. And paradigm changes are extremely slow. And one of the reasons why it's extremely slow is that people can only imagine what they can imagine. And you know, when Galileo or Copernicus, that was a real paradigm change, talked to people about not the Earth being the center of the universe, people said, come on, that's, you know, that's stupid. And it took 300 years. And 300 years is 9 lifetimes to see that paradigm change take up. I am here and now, I'm not sure whether we even are at the state of Copernicus and Galileo, in the sense we know what the new paradigm should be. So it will take longer. So I don't want to disappoint either you or our audience. We won't see that transition really happening. We won't see that. This said, and I don't want you to think that I'm a pessimist, I'm an optimist. We should add those bricks that we can add to that paradigm change, hoping and knowing that somebody will come who will take that forward, and at a certain point there will be a tipping point, hopefully, or the Earth as we know it will not exist, which is also an option.
Thank you. Let me try to drag you into some of the what you call nitty-gritty, Robert. I'd like to have some comments on this very fashionable and trendy term of active travel, which is usually defined as something which requires a physical activity. But there's already some confusion there, because people are trying to already include in active travel things like electric scooters, which do not really require a lot of physical activity. But let's try to understand this. Like I said, it's usually defined, let me put it this way. We touched upon some of the jargon of transition theory. Is active travel one of the so-called niches of the potential transition that can contribute to change the regime? And does it have the potential, if properly exploited, to play the role of a decisive, again, niche in promoting this transition towards sustainability? Or again, does it fit with some adjustment and some, whistles and bells added to the traditional paradigm into the current paradigm, without allowing us to nurture significant hopes in terms of how it would change? Of course, this affects primarily urban travel, but we know that 70–80% of people indeed live in urban environments, so it is a significant component. But my personal, in terms of, we talk about language here, I think that there might also be some kind of deliberate confusion when using the term active, because active evokes agency, evokes the fact that you are on top of things and you are the one who decides. And if this is the case, the car is the most active. The private car is the most active, because it is the means of transport which allows you to really be totally in control. In principle, that is how it is perceived, at least, and you decide when to leave, when to stop, when to accelerate, which itinerary to follow. So is there a confusion there, or is it just a matter of using terms appropriately? Andreu?
Yes, I think this is a really important question. I think this is something that is happening in our cities, and it's changing the city itself. Let's say when we remove cars and we give more space to people to walk, I believe we are making cities more livable, because we are giving spaces for people to see each other. So people which are increasingly different, from different origins, different income levels, different genders, different cultures, different religions, they are together in public spaces, and they are also together in public transport, public facilities. So to have people moving all around, wandering around, and not just even traveling, just playing on the street, just talking with each other on the street. This makes the cities and the places much livable, more meaningful. So I think this is really important, really important. On the other hand, it's true that this is another thing, going by plane or by car. I think it's different than walking or running or riding a bike. It's completely different. The way you feel your body when you are walking, you feel your body and you think in a different way than when you are running. And also you feel your body and the way you think is different. And when you are running with other people, let's say, when you are riding a bike, it's completely different experience. And I think people that begin to do these things regularly will enjoy this. In our analysis, in cost-benefit analysis of public transport in cities, we begin to realize that the most important social benefit of public transport, of removing cars, is giving chances to people to walk. because one of the main problems we have is obesity, is health problem related to lack of exercise. So instead of moving people as fast as possible from A to B, if we give options to people to do more exercise when they are moving, we are improving a lot the social health. So that's amazing. So that means that maybe the intersection, the points where people change from bus to another bus, maybe that they don't have to be one close to the other. So waiting time, walking from one bus to another bus, you waste time, but you improve your health condition. So these kind of paradoxes, we begin to realize, paradoxes that we didn't see years ago. And I finished showing you by this watch, was a present by my sons. And this watch is monitoring my exercise. It's amazing. So it's telling me, you are not walking enough. You are not running enough today. I have all my hiking. I have all the all the monitoring of my exercise. And there are social networks with this kind of devices. So I in this case, I think is a positive technological development in this particular case.
Cyborg active travel, basically.
Yeah, but
Robert.
Always everything good has a bad negative externalities. I still don't know which are, but for sure there are.
I'll tell you some.
Okay, thank you.
I'm an ardent biker and a Flannery walker, so that's how I move on a bike or walking. However, I love when two upper middle class men talk about how to change the world. Oh yes, active mobility is great for me and you, but the elderly, mostly women, the poor, those who are living on the outskirts, maybe don't even have a home, those who are juggling with 3 jobs, not so much. Yes, active mobility and placemaking, and I'm obviously ardently supporting getting rid of cars and creating places for walking and sitting and being in the city. And this is mostly happening in city centers, where people see and where politicians can sell this is a great effort. Go to the suburbs and you see cars all over. So, I, again, see a lot of this discourse being top-down, being run by the lifestyles and the mobility choices of the upper social echelons, and paying very little attention to the forms of life, to the majority of the people who cannot use such active forms of life. This said, there are good examples. The 15-minute city is at least a good ideal to have most or all your socialities within reach of 15 minutes. However, again, when you have to work in a factory, then that choice won't be so much embraced in the center of the city where the upper middle class mostly live, or in suburbia, where again the upper middle class lives and would not want to see a big factory spring up. Or here's your externality: push manufacturing to China, and then we live an easy life. Or push it elsewhere and have mining ruining Africa, but then we have nice batteries that we can use in our watches that measure our active mobility.
Andreu, do you have a, because again, talking about nitty-gritty, the other aspect of this question is whether all these diffusion, apparently, especially in the city centers, as you were saying, Robert, of the so-called micro-mobility. Is this a real signal of change? Is this, and is it a signal of change which is aligned with the ultimate objective that we're discussing today about a more sustainable mobility system, or is it again just a fad? And some a fad with not only maybe again only transitory, but also to some extent bring us in the opposite direction. I mean, I think that in the city where I live, I can see people using e-scooters, which probably use e-scooter instead of walking as they did before. So this is paradoxically, yes, of course, it's electric, so it's supposed to be clean and so on and so forth. But in terms of the benefits of physical activity, I personally have strong and serious doubts about whether this explosion of e-scooters and a little less e-bikes, because e-bikes, I mean, you have to pedal. You may pedal if you want. On e-scooters, you just stand there. It's not even good for your spine, incidentally. On the other hand, if you want to be more optimistic, it's again a transitional technology that. As we were saying, Robert, the transition is going to be slow anyway. So maybe this is just a step of a process which helps understanding people that they can move away from the car. Should we be more or less optimistic about this, Robert?
Should we be optimistic about these incremental changes? I am always an optimist. I think that yes, if these, for instance, if these modes fight for their existence on the road and become powerful enough to limit the worst, that is the car, yes. As bikes, we have seen in most cities, bike lanes are taking space from cars. In some cities, unfortunately, they're taking space from pedestrians. And this is, again, what we should, this is a value choice. And this is where politics come to play. I think when, and that's why I'm an optimist, because I am a deeply political person in this philosophical sense, that you have to make certain value choices and you have to be aware of what does what. It's not the technology that is driving you. It is the value choices that drives you. So yes, technology will appear, e-scooters. They're not good or bad. The choice we make, whether I can walk because I'm a 55-year-old healthy person. My mother or father, who are 87 and 90 respectively, they cannot use this scooter, and they don't have too many choices actually to move around in a city, which actually they would love to do because they're luckily enough healthy as their age, and also it's politics whether those bike lanes or whether those spaces that are required for these scooters, e-scooters, are pushing us to take away space from cars, therefore slowing car traffic down, therefore making its utility much less, because if they are equally slow or slower than other forms of mobilities, then people will more easily shift. So I think these are the important questions. It's not the technology that is important. It is the values that we stand for and the choices we make.
Yeah, very, very clear, and I think the benefits of micromobility are not undisputable. But my question was whether we should keep labeling this as a part of the active travel or not. I personally think it shouldn't. But it's a matter of nomenclature here. Andreu.
Yes, I think they are not. So because I mean, there is a difference between walking and the rest. Walking is a way of socializing as well. It's a way to find another person on the street by chance and talking with somebody you know you have been seeing for a long time. So it's, when we say the 15 minutes city, I don't like at all this term. It's just the neighborhood of always. Is the neighborhood or is the small town. In Europe we have plenty, and we see people walking all around. And I think this is the kind of European city we like, people walking all around. When you are going by micro mobility devices or by bikes, maybe you have a lot of fun because it's funny and people like, and it's cool and it's okay. But the value, the social value, the social benefit of having people walking is much higher, much higher than having people going, even cycling. So cycling is good, but it's kind of individualistic. So when you go to Amsterdam, for instance, you know, cycling is kind of people go as fast as possible. So it's not doing a sport, just moving as fast as possible because it's a very efficient way of transport. So I think that the value of walking is much higher. And therefore, I also think that a city where vulnerable people, children, elderly, can move around safely and comfortable are good cities for everybody. Maybe they are a little bit boring, but they are good cities for everybody to live. So I think it's important in the design of cities to take care of the mobility of vulnerable persons and giving to walking the most important priority.
Robert, you wanted to react to that?
Yes, I love active mobility and walking and biking. And when you see pictures of the cities that Andreu describes, it's always sunshine and it's always warm weather.
No,
I have to disappoint you, Andreu. We are living, at least I am living, in a city in the center of Europe where mostly the weather is not warm and the sun is not shining. And people don't walk and people don't bike. I do, but people don't when it's raining, when it's cold. And all these, again, interventions into creating these new systems of mobility are based on an imaginary that is fake. Go to any project meeting anywhere which favors walkability or public placemaking and look at the pictures they're showing. The sun is always shining and the weather is always hot or warm. This is not the city I live in, and this is not the city that the majority of 64% of the global population is living in. However much we preach these forms of life, we have to take into consideration and we have to find forms of life that are both active, non-card, that are suitable for these environments and for the people who are elderly, who are more vulnerable, children or women, and who are not using these forms because they cannot. And again, I want to warn us that please do not extrapolate from the social status that we enjoy, that what our forms of life allow will be good for everyone. It won't, because I don't want to disappoint you, but we're in a minority. And what we, as the most powerful, should be striving for, at least that's what I believe in, that we have a duty of care towards those who are less happy and less powerful. And it is our duty to help. And when we're designing our new cities and when we're designing our new forms of mobilities, it's not our demand, it's not our interest. It's not our form of life that should dictate, but it is theirs.
You think I don't know that?
No, I don't know if you know.
Everybody knows that.
I don't know if you know.
I'm just saying that the more people can walk, the more people can use public transport, the more opportunities people have to be together and not live exclusively, not live segregated life, the best for society, the best for the city. And this, I think everybody will agree. In each case, it's different. It's different Bhutan than the south of Chile or Alaska, of course. But the more people can live together and know each other, the best for society. And therefore, more people using public spaces, public transport, and public facilities, the best for society. The more people use individual, exclusive, segregated modes of transport and living, I think this is the society is worsening.
I agree.
What I'm saying.
Okay. Now here comes a point where in all our dialogues we cannot avoid touching upon the effect of the pandemics. I think it's becoming a little bit trivial to raise the subject, but it's so important that I think we cannot skip it. Now, my question here would be, on the one hand, we are observing a number of changes in mobility habits with very contradictory signs. There is less vehicle kilometers or passengers kilometers, especially relying on, the kind of tool we are using today for our conference, the so-called smart working. I hate the word, but that's what it's called. Remote working, I prefer. So there are signs which could be interpreted as going in the right direction, whereby they are contributing to reducing a certain, what I would call maybe not non-essential mobility. And the crisis of the pandemics maybe has helped realizing that part of our mobility is not as essential as it was, question mark. On the other hand, there are negative implications with people rebounding on private car because they feel that they are safer from the health point of view. So a very contradictory picture. So my first question would be, what do you make of this? But more importantly, I would say, are these changes that can be interpreted as steps towards this paradigm shift, Robert, that you were mentioning, in the sense that they will lead to a redefinition of some kind of a new normal, or is it something which will somehow disappear or be significantly downplayed once we believe that the pandemics is perceived, at least, to be under control?
Well, one thing that amazes me in the handling of the pandemic, that if you look at the previous pandemic, the Spanish flu. Sorry, Andrew. I think it's a racist term to call it a Spanish flu, but I don't know if there is another name. So the flu of 1917 and 18. It's surprising how little the treatment is different. Masks, social segregation, again, command and control. Okay, there are vaccines which were not in place then. So I'm not very optimistic that the new normal, as you call it, will be very different from the old normal. And as in the moment when these control mechanisms will be drawn back, I think basically the old forms of mobilities and transport will be back. Tourism will be back, flying will be back. And I don't think there is too much consideration of the forms that you allude to because of the pandemic. Also, just to refer to some things that are in my corner of the woods, it's great to say that, my mother and father would think that, yes, it's great that non-essential academic travel is now with Joan, because you know what they heard me doing is fly into a place, give a lecture, give a talk, and then come back home. But actually, and yes, that can be done via Zoom. But we do know that that academia is actually not happening on the lecture podium, but over coffee and beer, when I talk about my interest and the colleague talks about his or her, and we cook up a potential project and then start working on it, and then meet at another conference, again, not on the floor, but at the coffee shop, and discuss it further. So I think we don't know, because those that are termed non-essential travels will stop us from coming up with academic, in my field, innovations that will be lacking in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, when those projects are not happening, those innovations are not happening, that we are not discussing today over coffee. And I would love to hear Andrew, not in the public, but what he thinks of life, etc. And maybe we could do something together. But once we switch off the Zoom, Andrew and I will be back to our normal lives, and we can't talk about our shared interests over a beer or a glass of wine.
Andreu.
Yeah, I think we have been learning a lot of these communication technologies. I think we have been learning a lot and getting a lot of information we then had. But as Robert said, we are the same people. We are the same people, the same values, the same wishes, the same desires. Just that we have much more information. But it's important information. Let's say, I think we know now that sending a WhatsApp is different than an email, is different than a phone call, is different than Zoom or a Meet, or there are so many different ways of communication that maybe we will give more value to a physical contact. So you are traveling to some place to meet other people, people matters. So people matters, and the social interaction matters. So maybe there is something good of this, that we have different ways of communication, and we will use properly all of them maybe. But this comes with more control, of course, because teleworking, for instance, means better systems of controlling who is doing what, at what time, and how to exchange information. So more teleworking is also more control on the institution. So everything has advantages and problems. But we learn a lot. I will say we learn a lot, but we remain the same, with the same wishes, as always.
Robert.
I don't want to again disappoint you, but we are not the same people, and that's why we're cyborgs. We are very different when we have a mobile phone or a car than when we're sitting on a horse or walking with a friend. We are very different cyborgs, and I think it's both an illusion and a mistake to think that we're the same people, because that would tell us that we are in control of our technology. And again, this is what, among the many things that Heidegger taught us, that we're not in control, and many other philosophers of technology. We're not in control. And there is an extremely strong illusion in modernity that the knowing subject and the knowable object is a different thing. And I don't think Descartes was wrong, I have to say. So you, Andrea, like bold statements. Descartes was wrong. We are not beings because we think. We are beings because we try to fend off our moral choices, but we cohabit and share this earth, this world, and we are not the same things when we are entangled with different technologies. We're always different. And the real problem is that we don't know that we're always different.
Well,
think of a driver, think of what's happening on the road, just one sentence.
In Parmenides and Heraclitus, we were talking about if we are the same or we are different. So it's the same thing. I'm
I
just
want to be.
12 months ago, I have the same wishes that now.
Of
But
course you don't.
I
Of
don't
course
think
you
that's
don't.
very different, but we learn a lot.
Of course you don't. They're wonderful, extremely nice and kind people who become animals when they get in a car, but they become car driver cyborgs. And this is just one example from my field. It's not the same guy. He's and I'm definitely using the male pronoun. He becomes an aggressive animal, and he's an extremely nice guy in any other cyborg situation, except when he's driving with his car. And we have tons of research. Why this is happening, how this is happening, etc. And this is an extreme example, don't fall to the illusion that you're the same person. You're not.
I know. This is when Ortega said, I'm me and my circumstance. And me and my circumstance. But I don't think we have to go as deep as like this. So to answer the question of Andrea.
No, that's fine. I like a bit of shouting. There's one issue on which I think we ought to spend at least 3 minutes, which is the area of mobility, which, in the perspective of future dynamics and the transition, looks, in my opinion, the gloomiest, in the sense that the moving away from the car is something we are still discussing on how to do it, and there are apparently pathways, options. They may take time, they may require fundamental cultural changes, but we can somehow maintain a quantum of optimism in the idea that we will succeed. Now, if we talk about air travel, I was reading reports, a number of reports recently, which seem to paint a picture of inevitable disaster from the sustainable point of view. No matter how you slice it, air travel is going to be a catastrophe. And to be provocative, once again, I don't know if you're familiar with this interesting American science fiction writer, Kim Stanley Robinson. He recently published a book, which is The Ministry for the Future, not the Ministry of the Future, but the Ministry for the Future, in which, well, it's a very ponderous book, so I'm not going to try to summarize it. But one of the ideas there is that the only way to curb the damages of air travel is to shoot planes down. And that's what a kind of a shadow ministry for the future does, while the official ones try to negotiate and nudge both governments and air companies towards more sustainable behaviors. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty there of how it will evolve. But like I said, it looks like there's really no way out there if we avoid shooting planes down. What is your take on this? Who wants to start? Robert?
Well, first and foremost, I want to again disappoint you about moving away from cars. 2020 was 63 million new cars sold. 21 will be 71.4 million. So there is a growth of 10% from 2020 to 21. And, you know, when you sell 71 million new cars, that means exactly 71 million more cars on the road, because the old cars don't die. They live on, except most of them are distributed to the global south from the global north. So there is no move away from the car, first. Second, I don't think when we think of aerial mobility, as the field is called, I don't think it's long haul travel. That's the problem. I just came home from Munich. The European Institute of Technology, Urban Mobility KIC, organized an event, and in the morning there was a session in which people spoke about placemaking and moving away from the car and how bad and dangerous the cars are. And in the afternoon session, experts in aerial mobility, urban aerial mobility, drones, small vehicles, etc., spoke about the beautiful future, the extremely beautiful future of our cities being populated by green, electric, fantastically comfortable aerial devices. And, you know, I was thinking, in 100 years from now, probably 100 years ago, in 1921, people were painting an extremely similar picture if there was a panel about how great cars will be in our cities. And 100 years from now, probably there will be another panel in which people will be saying we should move away from these aerial mobility devices, drones, etc., because they're killing our cities. Nobody is walking, nobody is talking to each other. They're sitting in their ponds and flying around. So I think the real trouble, basically what I wanted to call attention to, is not long haul in aerial mobility, but it is short haul and urban aerial mobility. And there are trillions and trillions and trillions invested in aerial mobility. So you said, Andreu, that you are a local politician. Let me give you one advice. Please, please stop aerial mobility in cities happening, because now you can. In 10 years or 20 years, you will not be able. And then it will be worse than cars. I promise.
Andreu.
Restrictions.
I can't hear you, sorry. Can you come closer to the mic?
I think that there are already a lot of restrictions, so you cannot fly a drone without a permit. So I don't think you can do that right now.
Well, in 1915, cars were banned in most cities. Then the industry selling the wonderful autonomy cars brought to everyday people reversed those bans, and they were all over the city. So it's the same all over again. Yes, today there are restrictions. Tomorrow there won't be restrictions.
It's true. So in the smart, sustainable city, maybe only robots will be happy. This may happen.
I guess we have to take a rendezvous in 10 years or 20 years time for those of us who will still be able to breathe the urban polluted air. I hope I will be among those. Robert, you already touched upon inequalities, and you even touched about the specific issue of gender when you mentioned that in active travel there are clearly visible inequalities, particularly for what concerns women. So seem to be saying that that gender is a meaningful variable in shaping the transition or trying to shape the transition toward a greener mobility. If that is the case, is this comes from, you know, gender-specific value differences? I mean, I know it can open up a Pandora box of debate about genetics and social impacts, but today, is there an obvious gender-specific set of values which are different? And what do we do with that? Robert.
First and foremost, sorry to offer some criticism to the organizers. We are 3 males here, and that's wrong.
Yeah, I know.
I hope that the other webinars were packed with women on the podium, and I feel somewhat ashamed that I'm only saying it now, and I should have said it earlier, that gender balance is important in such discussions. Second, I'm not sure whether gender-specific value differences matter, but yes, in our transportation or mobility's futures, we can learn a lot from gender discussions that took place across the board in many environments. And this is offers another reflection on walking and public placemaking. It is rarely discussed how gender unequal our public places are, and how gender unequal active forms of mobility are, because very little attention is paid to making them safe, making them open and transparent, and therefore offering the same security, if you will, that again male users enjoy. So the short answer is yes, we can learn a lot in designing our future forms of mobility from the multifold gender discussions that took place not only in mobility and transport, but elsewhere.
Of course. Andreu.
Yeah, I will say that in planning processes, when you are able to have women and children involved in the discussions, proposals just to improve. So I think that there is a good indication of the quality of an urban environment if women and children are okay. And I will say as well, other vulnerable people, elderly and so on. So there is a city, an environment, a public transport, a system which is sensitive to this population. I mean, not just to this population, sensitive to the humanity, because each one of us we have problems. Each one of us, we are not just the same. So if it is sensitive to the diversity of human characteristics, I think the city is much better. In particular, gender, yes.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end. I'd like to ask you a last question, give you a last opportunity, a round of opportunity to, in a very, simplified way, try to give us what you believe are the cultural factors that will prove the most critical in the transition towards sustainable mobility, which are the critical issues which have a cultural origin or a cultural characterization, and that we will have to address or at least consider, or maybe simply being more aware of when designing, trying to shape policies, actions, initiatives at all levels, starting from education all the way down to infrastructure building. Andrea, would you like to start for this last quick round?
For me, and Robert mentioned this at the beginning a number of times, for me is the trade-off of the controversy between social equity, let's say, and environmental improvement. Sometimes there is a contradiction. Let's say the vehicles which are the gross polluters used to be older, cheaper, owned by low-income classes. So when you are banning, you are saying, okay, these gross polluters cannot cross city center. You are in a way affecting a particular group of people. So when you apply licensing policies, in many cases, affluent people will take more advantage of environmentally sensitive measures. So the way we integrate environmental consciousness with social consciousness, I think this balance is complicated and important in order to make this transition that I think naturally, spontaneously tend to happen, how to make this transition, I would say, more conscious of the social implications it may have.
Robert.
Well, on one level, I think that all that I have been talking about was kind of cultural, in this sense. Although I think one of the major transition elements is to move away from the culture and nature divide. I think that there is no such thing as nature. However, again, bold this might sound, because the Earth is a complex of what you call culture and nature. And obviously, when you look at our fields, They are not nature. They are agri-industry. And when you look at the trees in our cities, they are, you know, parts of the built environment. So I think that one of the things that we have to do away with is this culture and nature divide, and try to reconceptualize how we relate ourselves to the world around us. And in this sense, I would again rephrase the question, not about cultural but political issues. So the real question is not whether cultural factors are critical to the transition. I think political factors are key to the transition. If we realize that our life worlds are political, and as Andreu has alluded to, every change favors some and disprivileges others. And the real question is not whether what kind of technology or mobility or transportation ways are leading towards the change, but how we mitigate the power differences that will be generated, and they will be generated by any change that is happening. And while one can claim that electrification of our mobility system is a step forward, the real question is not that. The real question is how we mitigate the externalities, how we mitigate the siphoning of public funds to the more affluent, etc. And if we pay enough attention to this, then I think our life worlds will be somewhat better.
Thank you very much, both of you. I personally enjoyed this session very much, and I think it was sufficiently not controversial, but certainly with the opportunity of some confrontation. So I think that's a good point and a helpful point for us who will have to try and make the most of of having picked your brains for 1.5 hours. So unless there are last minute burning issues you would like to add, I would like to close the session here, thanking you both very much again, and of course inviting you to the next webinars. It's very easy. It's always on Thursdays at 4 o'clock, and of course you're on our mailing list, so you will receive a notice for this. Like I said, the next one is about the role of the car. So I wonder whether Robert in particular would be keen to listen to what our speakers have to say. That's it. So we're right on time, 2 minutes advance. I think I can close the session here, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, definitely. And I hope that I get the invitation for next week, and I am all ears to know what your panelists will say about the car.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.